Welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of El Qarinas dos Muslima, which means in English, the Quran of the Muslims! Yes, we're going to be breaking this thing down verse by verse once again, breaking it down into factual, logical statements in English, so we as people can understand who or what is Allah, what does Allah intend with his book here, and more importantly, how does this affect you and I and the rest of the non-believers, the kafiri of the world, in our lives today. So, before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy, or you wish to argue with any of the things I'm about to say or have previously said, please first buy and read one of these, and after having done so, you will recognise that every word I'm going to say now is 100% accurate to the words of Allah and what Muslims believe today. So, let's get started. If you've been keeping up with the series, you would have watched the last video, and you will remember that the last video we went through Allah's actual official call to war for his Muslims. He is now appearing in a cloud above his Muslims and going, "Remember those Jews that we killed before? Let's go and kill the rest of them, yeah!" And he's like ramping his Muslims up to go and kill all the Jews and Christians really hatefully, so that his end times genocidal prophecy can be completed. Also, there is a threat at the end of this. If you don't do this, Muslims, you will be burning in the grave forever, and Allah will not love you anymore. So with the context of that last one in mind, let's carry on. 177. The Prophet saith, Allah appointed your king who is Talot. And they argued, they knew better than he. Allah said, though he seems poor and unfit to your eyes, I have chosen him above you, and will imbue him with the might at the time of prophecy. Allah knows what he is doing, and Allah knows all things. End of verse. So we get off to a flying start. I feel like this is another one of those poorly defined and very poorly written passages. So we need a little bit of extra context, which isn't in this book, which I will kindly supply you from the internet. So Allah appointed your king who is Talot. And what that means, Talot is an Islamic word, which means tall guy. And who they're actually talking about here is King Saul, who was the king of Israel. Now, the Islamic cultures mistakenly paint this guy as a Malik, which is an Islamic leader. But as we know from historical record, i.e. not the nonsense book here, actual factual sources from history, we know that King Saul of Israel was a real character, he was a real king in Israel, and he was opposed to Islamic worship and was an enemy of Islamic cultures. So with that in mind, we have to question why the prophet saith that Allah appointed your king who is Talot, because we know that Talot is Saul. So why would Allah be saying to his Muslims, I'm going to appoint you as a king, the king of Israel? Well, if you think about it, he's getting his insurgent force of murderous Muslims, his insurgents are going to have to go over to Israel in just a minute and behead and mercy all the people inside. And what they're probably thinking, these Muslims, is, how are we going to go and kill that huge kingdom over there full of people with a great big army and better technology and more money than us, when we're just a little force of desert insurgents who basically don't have anything? How is that going to work? So that is why Allah is saying, I'm going to give to you as a king this guy here, who's already an established king with a great big kingdom, so he's got a history, and we know, even though he's a skanky evil Jew, that he's actually a really good king, and he knows exactly what he's doing. So that's why Allah is saying to his Muslims, I shall appoint you, O Muslims, that guy as your king. And we don't have anyone like that. So, you know, he's going to lead you guys against his own kingdom. That's what this says. Then he goes on and says, but they argued that they knew better than he, as in the Muslims that he's telling argued with Allah and said, we know better than you. This guy, he's not fit for purpose. And I have a problem with that, because up to now, Allah does not put up with any arguing or doubts or questions that come his way from his Muslims. What he tends to do is accuse his Muslims of guilt and get other good Muslims to go and kill the ones who have the questions and the arguments. And that's been the story up until today. This is the first time in the entire Quran up to now that they have bothered to even try to argue with Allah. And to my surprise, not only do they argue with him and tell him he's wrong and this guy isn't going to be their king because he's a Jew, Allah doesn't kill them. He actually negotiates with him. So this is literally the first time ever Allah has actually bargained with his people rather than just commanded them. So let's carry on. They argued that they knew better than he, and Allah said, though he seems poor and unfit to your eyes, I have chosen him above you, and I will imbue him with the might at the time of prophecy. Allah knows what he is doing and knows all things. So what he's saying here, if we break this down, the Muslims are going, are you sure about this guy? Like, are you going to seriously give us this Jew that we fucking hate and that we thought we were going to kill? You're going to give him to us as our leader, and then we're going to go and kill his ex-kingdom that he just got picked from. Is that what you're saying, Allah? So even his devout Muslims who have never questioned him before, even at this stage, they are looking at Allah and they're like, has this guy lost his fucking rag? Like, what is he going on about? He's gone mad in the mind. Like, this can't be true. And then Allah, rather than going, how dare you argue with me, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, and kill them, as he did in the Moses story to the Israelites when they argued with him like this, no. He is more merciful and graceful this time, and I think it's because he realises he doesn't have very Muslims left at this point, and he still wants them to go and kill Israel, which is like a huge town, you know, a big kingdom. So he can't just kill his Muslims and tell them to get lost, because then he'll have no one, and that doesn't work for him. He needs men to go and kill the Jews. That's his main goal. So he says, though he seems poor and unfit to your eyes, O Muslims, I know he's like not what you'd expect. He's tall and fat, and he's a Jew, so he's not your typical Islamic killing murderous warrior. But I have chosen him above you. So what Allah is saying is, sorry Muslims, I've literally chosen this Jew king who you thought you were going to kill, this guy that we hate and we're going to in future want to murder. I have chosen him above all of you Muslims because he is better than you. So Allah, in his Quran of the Muslims, is literally saying to his Muslims, sorry guys, this Jew is way better than all of you. He's so good, I'm going to bring him over from his Israel kingdom and I'm going to put him as your leader. You will be led by a Jew who is the king of Israel. That is what this says. And then he rounds out by saying, even though he is poor and unfit to your eyes, I've chosen him above you, and I will imbue him with might at the time of prophecy. So what he's saying is, even though this guy's poor and unfit, O Muslims, I, Allah, in the book, I am going to empower this guy, Taluth, or Saul of Israel. I'm going to empower him with great wisdom and might at the time of prophecy, and he's going to lead you to victory against a bigger, stronger force and, you know, really powerful foes that you wouldn't otherwise be able to beat. That's what Allah is saying here. And then he caps off with one of the funniest things, and this isn't word for word, this is me translating it kind of colourfully. Allah knows what he's doing and knows all things, so off you pop, leave it to me. That's how he ends this verse. We'll carry on. 178. A sign of this is that Allah created the Ark of the Covenant and promises and holy relics from your Lord left by Moses and Aaron's descendants in Israel. But if you are faithful, you will accept this and not argue, O Muslims. End of verse. So if we break this down, I fucking love this. This is so funny. So after they argued with Allah, because they were like, look, Allah, we really want to follow you, right? We really want to believe all this ridiculous nonsense that you keep telling us, Allah. We really do. But really, you're going to make this fat, lazy Jew king who isn't even a warrior, you're going to make him our leader because you say he's better than all of us at being a leader of a military force, even though he's never done any fighting. Not only are you going to make him our leader and not one of us, you're then going to have him lead us against his old kingdom and destroy it. Is that what you're telling us? He is going to lead us against Israel and destroy all these much stronger, tougher foes. Is that what you're telling us, Allah? And Allah was like, yeah, sure, yeah, it's definitely what's going to happen. In fact, if you need proof, O Muslims, if you need proof, there's this thing I created called the Ark of the Covenant. That's the proof that you need. That's going to prove everything that I'm saying now to be true to you, to give you confidence that you can go and do all these ridiculous things I'm telling you to do. There's just one problem with that, though. It's in Israel. I don't know why I left it in there, Allah says to the Muslims. I'm not sure why I left it in there. It was kind of stupid for me to do that. But it's the proof that you'll be able to get in there and kill this big army. So what Allah is saying here, if we break it down, even though it's fucking dumb as shit, it really is. Allah is saying to his Muslims, after this fat, lazy Jew king who isn't a warrior comes over here and leads you as a warrior against his old kingdom, I'm going to imbue him with might and wisdom so that he can win against these bigger, stronger foes using you crappy little insurgent army. But not only that, since you don't believe me and you are not faithful Muslims, I'm going to make you faithful Muslims by giving you this great relic, this powerful relic that's going to prove everything to be true to you. Only problem is you have to do the thing first to get into Israel to recover the relic that's going to prove that you can do the thing. Get it? And then the last thing he says is, anyway, if you are faithful, O Muslims, you will accept this. So he's literally saying, look, you were arguing a minute ago. I'm telling you I've given you this relic which is in there, which is going to prove that you can get in there. So it's like a foul. Anyway. And then the last thing he says is, if you are faithful Muslims, you will accept this and you won't argue. So now he's not ready to argue any more with them. They got one question in argument. And that one question was, really? This guy's going to be our leader? And Allah was like, yeah, don't argue with it. And by the way, the relic's in there. Go and get it using this guy. If you argue, you're not worshipping me enough and you will go to hell and die in sin, says Allah in the book. End of verse. 179. Taluth led our armies and said, Allah will test your faith. Do not drink of the water of this stream, or you'll be stricken from your positions. You can have a little sip, but don't drink it properly. But most of them did drink it properly and didn't have the little sip as commanded. They said, Goliath is too tough for us, his armies are too big. And though many of them thought they would perish, and said, how can we beat Goliath and his great army when we are a small weak force ourselves? And Allah said to them, many times have our insurgencies defeated the armies of powerful nations, for it is thy will that those who worship only Allah see victory. End of verse. You just fucking love this. So this is an interesting one to break down. Let's get started with it. So he starts off by saying, this guy Taluth, who we stole from Israel, you know, the King Saul from Israel, we've nicked him. Now he's the leader of the insurgents. Even though he's a fat, lazy Jew king, he's not a warrior. He actually did lead our armies over there and defeat these guys. And how that happened, on the way, Allah said to the Muslims and Taluth as their leader, right, because you argued with me a minute ago and you don't seem that faithful, I'm going to test your faith. And the ones who fail that test aren't going to win the battle. Only the ones who pass the faith test will win the battle. And this test is, you're going to come in the desert while you're traveling and you're carrying all your heavy stuff, your armor and your swords and stuff. You're going to come across this great spring of fresh water and you're really going to want to drink it because it's blazing hot. You're in the desert. But you're not allowed to drink it, says Allah to his Muslims. You're not allowed to drink it. You're only allowed to have a little mouthful. You're not allowed to drink it properly. And if you do this and you don't drink of it properly, you only have a little mouthful, then you've passed the faith test and you will go on to victory, says Allah in the book. Do not drink any water because you will be stricken from your positions, but you can have a wee sip. But most of them did drink of it anyway. So most of them actually failed this faith test. Like, it's not looking very good for Allah here, is it? He's had to swoop into Israel to get their fat, lazy king who's not a warrior to lead his insurgents because, according to Allah, this guy who's never had a fight in his life is better at leading a military than all these guys who are the insurgents. So between the lines, guys, what Allah is saying here is his insurgents fucking suck at fighting and they're going to need their enemy's king to defect and lead them with insider knowledge in order to have any chance against them. Then he does a little faith test thing and they fail it. Then what happens is the army are approaching Israel, and what happens, according to this, Allah in the book says, they see Goliath, this great big monstrous, like, tough enemy, and his big army right in front. This isn't Israel, this is Goliath, and his army are in front of Israel, facing out like they're defending it, and the Islamic insurgents led by Taluth are going to fight this guy now. So what happens is, as the so fucking dumb, as they approach, they see Goliath and his army and they're scared and they go, oh Allah, Goliath is too tough for us, his armies are too numerous for us. And most of them thought they were going to die at this point, right? So they turn around to Allah and they say, how can we beat Goliath and his huge army when we are just a small, weak force ourselves? So they're doubting him. Well, they've just done nothing but doubt him so far. Even though he did the faith test and they all failed it, now they're just openly questioning him and saying, Allah, this is madness. You're sending us over there to beat Israel, and first we've got to beat this Goliath character and his big army. So we've got two big battles to do, one after the other. We're not even allowed to have a drink. How are we going to win this? We think we're going to die. We're not going to survive this, is what they're saying. And Allah says to them, many times have our insurgencies defeated the armies of powerful nations, for it is thy will that those who worship only Allah may see victory. End of verse. Now, breaking this down is going to be a lot of fun for me, because there's a few little holes that I want to pick in this. the Muslims in the insurgency with Taluth as their king see Goliath and they're like, this guy's too tough for us, how are we going to beat him? And Allah says, because of my will for you to win, I'm going to make you beat them. And how this is going to work is just, you just have to have faith that you're going to beat. Even though you've just failed 3 times in a row faith tests, and most of you left and thought that you weren't going to win, so there's a smaller army left, with a Jew as a king who you don't like, who hasn't had a battle in his life. You're going to go and beat Goliath in this big army, and the way you know this is because Allah is saying to you, many times before, guys, have this exact thing happened before, and a small group of Islamic insurgents have actually brought down a big powerful nation. And this is the important bit, guys. Allah says, it is thy will, Allah's book, Allah in the book, it is Allah's will that those who worship only Allah, i.e. have never worshipped anyone else before, i.e. not Taluth, their leader from the Jew kingdom, who was worshipping this god. It is Allah's will that only those who worship Allah may see victory. So, we can see here, this is not looking good for the insurgent Muslims, is it? First of all, they're a small force, half of them left because they failed the faith test, so it's an even smaller force. They're being led by a fat, lazy Jew king who's never had a fight in his life and worshipped a god previous to Allah. And Allah, Allah in his grace and wisdom and mercy, tells his Muslim extremists in their little insurgency force, don't worry guys, it's my will that those who only ever worship me win their fights, even though the guy who's your leader wasn't worshipping me a minute ago, was worshipping this guy over in Israel, the kingdom who we have to go and kill after we've beaten Goliath and his big army. That's what this means. So, we move to the last verse, where all this will start to make a little bit more sense, because obviously Allah in his book writes like a 7-year-old illiterate retard and makes no sense whatsoever. So, I'll carry on. 180. They advanced towards Goliath and his army, and did slay him dead, and shout, Our Lord, help us kill all those who did not believe. David was the one who slew Goliath, for Allah gave him all power and wisdom, so by Allah's will they were routed. Then Allah joined all nations to Islam, for else the world would be at a mischief. But Allah made a bounty of all nations for ye. End of verse, end of reading. So, if you've been keeping up and you are, midway intelligent, if you've got a little bit of logic, which I know you do because you're watching these videos, you will recognise that this is a terrible way for Allah to end his own parable, and it actually completely ruins the whole thing. Let's talk about why that is. So he starts off by saying, I'm only going to let those who only worship me see victory, and Taluth, who wasn't worshipping me a minute ago, who's not even a warrior, he's leading you against Goliath and his forces, so it's not looking good. But then, in a massive turn of fate, the advancing insurgents led by Taluth, they start fighting Goliath, and Goliath is slain dead and all his armies are killed. And while this is happening, they're shouting, Our Lord, help us kill all those who did not believe. So the thing that you think this is going to do, because it's his Muslims and Taluth shouting towards Allah, help us kill Goliath and these guys. So first of all, you think, oh, so the insurgents and Taluth killed Goliath then. So they did get the thing that Allah was. So Allah's prophecy did happen in his own, narration of his own story. His insurgents did kill Goliath, just like he said, led by Taluth, who's never worshipped anyone apart from the Jewish God first. Even though that's not what he said, but they've beaten him. It did happen, even though it didn't happen right. But no, the very next line says, David was the one who slew Goliath. David, who we'd not mentioned before, and we don't know who this David guy is. David is the next king of Israel that follows Saul. King David, who made this Star of David on the flag of Israel. That is the guy who literally made that. King David, who followed King Saul. So, in the story, according to Allah, in his ridiculous nonsense version of things, his army were going towards Goliath and going, oh, we're shitting ourselves, we're not going to win, Allah, please help us. Allah helped them with the Jew king who previously was worshipping the God of Israel. But even so, they were doing all this fighting, and the person who won the battle for them, who killed Goliath and his armies, was King David of Israel, who doesn't worship Allah, has never worshipped Allah, is an enemy of Allah, lives in Israel and worships the God of Israel. But that's the guy who wins the battle, despite Allah prophesying it be Taluth and his crappy little insurgents. In fact, if you think about it, his crappy little insurgents and Taluth only survived because David of Israel saved them from Goliath. Just saying. And he rounds out the verse by saying, Allah gave David all power and wisdom so that by Allah's will, Goliath and his enemies could be routed, and that's what happened. And then after that, Allah joined all the nations of Islam, for else the world would be in a mischief. But Allah made a bounty of all nations for you Muslims. End of verse. So, if we break this down, we can see that Allah is having another little senior moment. I feel like he needs to go and have another little nap. A few hours kip might do him good, because he's losing the train of his thought here. He keeps forgetting what he's talking about. So originally he prophesied that Taluth, the fat Jew king who's never had a battle in his life, was going to lead his Islamic insurgents against Goliath and kill him that way. But then, as we hear in verse 251 in the Quran, David was the one who slew Goliath, actually. It wasn't Taluth, it wasn't his insurgents. They basically just watched while David alone killed Goliath and his armies. And then after that, Allah joined all nations to Islam. Despite the fact that Israel is still there and they haven't invaded them yet, so Israel aren't part of Islam. Despite the fact that only 4 or 5 countries have been mentioned in this book at this point, and only one of them is Islamic. And not only that, he says he joined all the nations to Islam, so the world would not be at a mischief anymore. But correct me if I'm wrong, Allah, in the book. The world is at mischief. You yourself are causing a holy war and pitting human against human, so they kill each other down to the last man. We've got communism in China. We just had COVID. We've got poverty and we've got environmental destruction. We've got unrest in Iran and Syria. And we have unrest here in Britain. So all that stuff, Allah, is a mischief which is still happening today, and you haven't joined all these nations to Islam. Britain, America, Europe, Australia, Armenia, Japan, China, pretty much every other country apart from like a couple are not Islamic nations. So this is definitely flat out false, more lies from Allah. And then he ruins it even more in his very last line. But Allah made a bounty of all nations for ye. So correct me if I'm wrong, Allah. If you just joined all the nations to Islam, you can't make a bounty of all nations because you've already fucking got all nations. If you just converted the whole world to Islam, what's left for the bounty, oh Allah? And that's the end of our reading. So, in conclusion, we can tell what's going on here. Allah knows that his Muslims, who he's trying to motivate to go and kill all the non-believers and chop their heads off in the rest of the world, are vastly outnumbered, outskilled and outmaneuvered because they don't have good technology or military tactics at this point. And the non-believers, the rest of the world, the polytheists, the atheists, the Christians and the Jews are markedly richer and better and stronger than they are. And we know this because Allah tells us in his own words. And not only that, he tricks his Muslims into thinking that the Jew king, who has built this huge kingdom of Israel and is currently on the throne ruling it really well, and they're really happy and rich, Allah tells his Muslims that that guy is going to leave Israel, come over here and lead them back into it to kill it. But that's not what happens. What actually happens is Goliath, the second king, comes out and he slays Goliath. And then the invasion of Israel doesn't actually happen. So all the insurgents at this point go, yeah, Allahu Akbar, we didn't die. And then they bugger off back home. But they didn't invade Israel. They didn't kill Goliath or the armies. In fact, all they did in this whole story is argue with Allah, lose a few tests of faith. They failed 3 tests of faith with Allah. Half of them left before that. Then the ones that remained watched David beat Goliath for them and then go back to his kingdom, and they didn't invade it. They just buggered off home. And then to top it all off, Allah in the end says, I've joined all the nations to Islam, which clearly isn't true. And then says, I've made them all a bounty for you, ye Muslims, which is also not true. And that is the end of our video. So, I hope you've been enjoying this and you learnt something. Tomorrow we're going to go through even more inane ramblings of the illiterate warlord Allah and see really where his mental state has disappeared to, because it certainly isn't where it should be, considering he claims to be a merciful, powerful, all-wise, all-concerned God of the Muslims. But we can see he isn't very good at being a god, he isn't very good at leading his people, he's actually more good at inciting violence, and that is where we're going to pick up tomorrow at 7:15 when we get back to the next episode of Without Lies, Islam Dies. So that really is the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed this and you listened and learned, and you're looking forward to tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, good night, God bless, and I will see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. Oh, that was fun, wasn't it? So if you want to catch up with me tomorrow, since we're done for today, I'll be back at 7:15 a.m. and we will be going through Allah's protection of his faith, how he intends to do this, and more importantly, the punishments he is going to lather on the sinners and the non-believers in order that people only worship him. So look forward to that. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, good night, God bless, and I will see you in the next one. Bye now.